Snow drifted across the platform in restless veils, each flake stinging where it touched exposed skin. Yet Evelina Hartwell stood straight-backed, her gloved hands tight around the leather handle of her trunk. The whistle of the departing train shrilled behind her, vanishing into the white. She felt the eyes of the town upon her, unseen yet piercing, as though the entire settlement had paused to measure her worth. At 49, she bore the years not as burden but as quiet testimony. Silver strands weaving through auburn hair, fine lines about her eyes, the grace of endurance in her shoulders. She had imagined that those years would be seen as richness, but here in this strange place, the air tasted more of judgment than welcome. A man approached from the cluster near the station house, his hat low, coat patched. His name she had rehearsed on the journey. Franklin Dyer, a rancher in need of a wife, the man who had written to her with brief, plain words promising warmth and work. His boots dragged as he walked, and when his eyes lifted to her, something changed. It was swift as a shadow. The spark of expectation dulled, his mouth pulled into a hard line, and in that moment Evelina knew. He had not imagined her like this. He had imagined youth. "You're her." His voice was flat, barely carrying above the wind. He looked her up and down, not lingering but measuring, as though tallying flaws. "I am Evelina Hartwell," she said softly, her words trembling against the frost. She tried to smile, to offer kindness in place of doubt. "I came as you asked." He spat into the snow, the dark stain spreading. "Too old," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. Then clearer. "I can't. I thought you'd be younger." His hand twitched against his coat pocket as though eager to flee. Her throat closed, though she forced her voice calm. "Your letters spoke not of age, but of companionship, of shared." "I won't do it," he cut her off, his words like an axe. "I need someone who can bear children, not a woman old enough to be done with such things." The crowd stirred. Laughter spilled like kindling catching flame. Clara Boone, the blacksmith's daughter, let out a high, cruel note. "She thought she could still catch a man," she said, her arms crossed tight, lips curling. "Imagine coming all this way for nothing. A widow and wrinkled besides." Heat flared in Evelina's cheeks, hotter than any fire. She held her trunk as though it anchored her to the earth. The snow bit through her shoes, the cold pressing hard against her skin, but the sharper pain was within. Years of waiting, of lonely nights whispering prayers for a chance, had led her here, and here she was cast aside like spoiled bread. Franklin Dyer stepped back, unwilling even to offer her the courtesy of a farewell. He turned into the crowd, swallowed by mutters and jeers, leaving Evelina alone upon the platform. The laughter did not stop. Children pointed. Men shook their heads, women whispered behind gloved fingers. Every sound carved deeper into her ribs. She wished for invisibility, for the cloak of night. But daylight and snow left her bare. Her trunk felt suddenly heavy, as though stuffed not with clothing but with all her failures. She shifted it to her other hand, her breath fogging in clouds before her face. The urge to flee, to vanish into the white wilderness, pressed at her ribs. Yet her boots would not move. She stood there, trapped between humiliation and fear. And then silence cut through. It was not commanded, yet it spread. One by one, heads turned. The laughter died. The wind itself seemed to falter. Evelina felt it before she saw, a presence pressing into the space like thunder rolling down from the mountains. From the storm's veil stepped a man tall and broad, his chest bare beneath a fur-lined cloak that swung open in the gale. His skin was bronzed, scarred, marked by a life of battles. His black hair streamed loose over his shoulders, catching flakes of snow. The people on the platform shrank back though he had not raised a hand. His gaze moved slowly, steady, until it found Evelina. She could not breathe. His eyes held her, as though she were the only figure in this frozen world. No ridicule lived in them. No rejection. Only a stillness vast as winter. She felt seen wholly, for the first time in many years. Someone whispered, "Apache," and the word carried fear, prejudice, awe. Men's hands twitched near rifles but did not lift them. The stranger did not glance at them. His steps crushed the snow as he came forward, unhurried, his gaze never leaving Evelina. When he stopped before her, towering, the storm seemed to bend around his shoulders. She looked up, her shame pressing hard, her voice a trembling thing. I don't know where to go." His hand, strong and scarred, reached for the handle of her trunk. Without effort he lifted it, swinging it to his side as though it weighed nothing. He placed his other hand upon her shoulder, not with possession but with grounding, steady, warm even through her cloak. He said no words. Yet something in his silence spoke louder than any man's scorn. The crowd held its breath, waiting for mockery, violence, spectacle. Instead, the stranger turned with Evelina's trunk in hand and began to walk. He did not look back, did not answer the whispers. Evelina stood frozen a moment longer, her heart pounding, then felt her feet moving of their own will. She followed him off the platform, each step away from the station loosening the chain of humiliation. The laughter behind them sputtered, strangled into silence. Snow thickened, cloaking the tracks of their departure. Evelina's chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, her mind whirling. Who was he? Why had he come? Why had he not laughed? Questions pressed but no words formed. All she knew was that the sharp edge of despair had dulled the moment his hand touched her shoulder. The storm swallowed the station behind them, and before them stretched only white silence and the stranger's broad back. She had been rejected, yes, cast aside with cruelty. Yet as she followed the Apache into the storm, a trembling thread of something strange and defiant stirred within her. The faintest spark of belonging, a whisper that the story was not ended, only begun. The snow did not let up as they walked, but the man's stride was steady, his broad shoulders parting the storm as though it were no more than tall grass. Evelina kept close behind, her skirts heavy with frost, the tips of her boots numb with cold. She did not ask where they were going, nor did he offer. Each step forward seemed to be the only answer he gave. The weight of her trunk hung effortlessly from his hand, the muscles in his arm shifting beneath skin marked by scars. She studied him in moments, trying to piece a story from his silence. The people at the station had named him Apache in a tone steeped with fear, yet he moved with a kind of gravity that calmed rather than threatened. At last, through a curtain of white, a cabin revealed itself. Timber walls stout against the wind, roof bowed beneath drifts of snow. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, promising warmth inside. Evelina's breath caught. After the sting of rejection, the sight of shelter felt almost unreal, like something conjured by prayer. The man pushed the door open with his shoulder, and stepped aside for her to enter. She hesitated, the threshold a line between the known shame behind her and the unknown quiet before her. Then she stepped across, drawn by the faint glow of fire. The cabin was simple but strong. A hearth at the center, a table of rough wood, pelts laid across the floor to soften the harshness of the boards. Her trunk was set gently near the wall. Without a word, the man moved to the hearth and bent to stir the embers, coaxing flame from slumber. Sparks leapt, and soon the fire spread, crackling, throwing warmth into the room. Evelina sank onto a stool, letting the heat bite into her frozen hands. The silence pressed around her, yet it did not suffocate. It was a silence of space, of respect. He brought her a bowl carved from wood, steam rising from its contents. The broth was simple, meat and herbs, but to Evelina it tasted richer than any banquet. She lifted the spoon with trembling hands, aware of his watchful eyes upon her. He did not sit, not yet. He stood with the stillness of a mountain, his gaze steady, patient, as if weighing whether she would accept what he offered. At last she lowered the spoon and set it aside, her voice a fragile thread. "I should thank you. You did not have to intervene." Her words faltered, inadequate for the weight of what had been spared her at the station. He tilted his head, his long hair shifting across his chest. "They are cruel," he said finally, his voice low, a river under ice. "But cruelty does not define truth." The words were accented, each syllable measured, carrying more weight for their sparseness. Evelina looked down at her hands, worn from years of work, veins raised beneath thin skin. Cruelty had shaped much of her life, even if she had not named it so. A husband taken by fever, children lost in infancy, years of loneliness gnawed at by whispers that her time for love had passed. She had come west with hope, only to find it crushed beneath laughter. Yet here was a man who spoke as though the mockery were smoke, insubstantial. A sound broke the silence, light as a bird's wings. From behind a curtain at the far corner, a child appeared. A girl no more than 8, her black hair in 2 braids, her eyes bright as polished stone. She looked from Evelina to the man and back, curiosity sparking across her face. Without hesitation she patted over the pelts and stopped before Evelina, peering up at her with the unguarded wonder only children possess. "This is my sister's daughter," the man said. "Her name is Redbird." The girl's small hand reached for Evelina's, warm and sure. Evelina felt her throat tighten as she let the hand rest in her own, the gesture cutting through layers of solitude more swiftly than words. Redbird smiled, shy but steady, and settled onto the pelts near Evelina's feet as though she had always belonged there. The girl's presence softened the edges of the silence, filling the cabin with something Evelina had not felt in years, the pulse of family. The man, Tahu, she guessed his name from the way the girl had whispered it, moved to sit across from her at the table. His eyes never wandered, holding hers with a calmness that unsettled and comforted all at once. "The snow is heavy," he said. "You cannot leave tonight." Evelina nodded slowly. She had nowhere to go, but admitting it aloud felt like surrender. "I will not be trouble," she murmured. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, more an easing of solemnity. "You are not trouble. You are guest." She let the words sink into her, their warmth settling deeper than the fire's heat. Guest. Not burden, not cast off, not too old. Guest. It was a simple kindness, but it anchored her. Night grew heavier, the wind clawing at the cabin walls. Evelina found herself drawn to the window, watching snow streak across the glass. Behind her, Redbird hummed softly to herself while arranging carved figures on the floor. Small animals polished smooth from use. Tahu added wood to the fire, the flames painting his skin in amber light. Evelina's eyes lingered on the scar that crossed his shoulder, pale against the bronze. He carried history on his body, just as she carried it in her hair and face. Both marked, yet still enduring. Later, when Redbird had curled beneath blankets near the hearth, Evelina lay awake on the cot Tahu had given her. The warmth of furs wrapped around her, but her mind stirred restlessly. The rejection at the station replayed in jagged fragments. Laughter, scorn, the finality of Franklin Dyer's voice. Shame burned anew, though muted now by the steady crackle of fire. She rose quietly and crossed to the window, looking out into the night. There she saw him, Tahu, kneeling in the snow beyond the cabin, bare-chested despite the cold, his head bowed. His lips moved, though she could not hear the words. He prayed, perhaps to the stars, perhaps to a god she did not know. The snow swept over him, yet he remained still, grounded as stone. Evelina pressed her palm to the cold glass, her breath fogging it faintly. Something in his posture stilled her own heart. He was not pleading as she had so often done in her loneliness. He was speaking as one certain of being heard. She envied it, yet she also felt herself included somehow, as though those whispered words beneath the night sky had reached her too. When he rose and turned back toward the cabin, she stepped away from the window, slipping beneath the furs again. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it carried a fragile sense of safety she had not known in many years. The last sound she heard before drifting off was the door closing softly, and the faintest trace of snow melting from his hair. The night held its silence, but it was no longer the silence of exile. It was a sanctuary, waiting to see if she would claim it. The storm eased by morning, leaving the land washed in white, the horizon blinding under pale sunlight. Evelina wrapped herself in a borrowed cloak, its fur collar brushing her cheek as she followed Tahu and Redbird into town. The path was narrow where he had broken the snow with his steps, and she kept close, her boots sinking into the trough he carved. She had not intended to return to the place where humiliation had carved itself into her bones, but Redbird had insisted on showing her the shop where sweets were kept, and Tahu had nodded with quiet certainty, as if the matter required no debate. The town was awake, smoke pluming from chimneys, voices carrying on the brittle air. Yet when Evelina entered the main street, conversation stuttered, then dropped into a hush. She felt eyes upon her as before, but this time she was not alone. Tahu walked beside her, his chest bare beneath a draped hide despite the cold, his height shadowing her like a wall. Redbird clutched Evelina's gloved hand, swinging it with childish ease. The warmth of that small palm steadied her, but her heart hammered at every glance darting her way. Clara Boone stood outside the mercantile, lips pursed, arms folded across her bodice. "Back already?" she drawled, loud enough for all to hear. "Thought you'd have sense to leave on the next train." Evelina forced her chin high though her cheeks burned. Before she could answer, Tahu's gaze lifted, fixing Clara with a stare that emptied the smirk from her mouth. No word left him, but Clara shifted aside, muttering to the woman beside her. Evelina caught snatches of it. "Too old, foolish, charity case," and the words slid beneath her ribs like knives. Inside the mercantile, the air smelled of dust and molasses. Redbird tugged her toward a jar of peppermint sticks, pressing her nose against the glass with delight. Evelina crouched, pressing a coin into the girl's hand, whispering that she might choose one. When Redbird darted off, Evelina rose to find Tahu near the counter, his gaze locked with Silas Boone, Clara's father. The man's beard was white, his hands heavy on the counter, as though bracing the weight of his words. "You bring her here," Silas said, voice low but sharp, "after the whole town saw what she is." His eyes flicked to Evelina, then back to Tahu. "Why? You can have your pick of young widows, if you're set on mixing blood. But her? She's near 50 and broken by it." Evelina stiffened. The world seemed to tilt, the wooden floor creaking beneath her boots. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but her tongue held fast, heavy with shame. Tahu's reply was slow, each word deliberate. "She is not broken. You mistake cruelty for truth." The elder snorted, waving him off. "Don't waste strength on scraps. Best she take a train back east before folks start saying you've gone soft." Evelina turned away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. She busied herself with gathering flour and salt, but the words coiled inside her, heavy and poisonous. She could not remember the last time she had been wanted for more than what she could provide. To be spoken of as waste, as nothing, cut deeper than she thought she could still bear. They left the mercantile in silence, Redbird skipping between them, Peppermint clutched in her mittened fist. Evelina kept her gaze lowered, watching the snow crunch beneath her boots. She felt the townsfolk's stares like thorns against her skin. The air held no warmth here. The only comfort was the steady presence beside her, Tahu's arm brushing hers when the path narrowed. Back at the cabin, the fire's glow wrapped her, but the sting of words followed. Redbird played near the hearth, arranging the carved animals in tidy rows, while Evelina sat at the table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Tahu set the flour on the shelf, then turned to her, waiting. "They think me foolish," she said finally, her voice a thin reed. "Perhaps they are right. I believed I might still be wanted. But I am old and my worth long spent." Tahu's eyes softened, though his face remained solemn. He crossed the room, standing before her, his shadow stretching long across the table. "You listen too much to ghosts," he said. "Their voices will not warm you. They only keep you cold." She met his gaze, startled by the certainty there. Ghosts? Yes, that was what they were. The laughter at the station, the scorn in Clara's voice, Silas's cruel dismissal. All echoes, yet still they rattled her bones. Evelina pressed her hands together tighter, willing the trembling to stop. Redbird climbed into her lap without invitation, laying her head against Evelina's chest. "Tell me a story," the child whispered. Evelina froze, then hesitantly wrapped her arms around the girl, her body remembering an old rhythm she thought lost forever. She began to speak of her childhood on a farm in Missouri, of fireflies and river stones, of a doll sewn from scraps. Her voice steadied as she spoke, and Redbird listened with wide eyes, as though every word was a treasure. When the girl drifted to sleep, Evelina sat still, feeling the rise and fall of her small breaths. Across the fire, Tahu watched, his gaze unreadable yet unwavering. Something in his silence pressed against her shame, not denying it, but refusing to let it be the only truth. She lowered her cheek to Redbird's hair, the scent of smoke and peppermint soft against her. Days passed, the snow deepening, gossip spreading faster than thaw. Evelina heard it when she went into town for supplies, felt it in the glances that slid away when she met them. Men muttered that Tahu had taken pity on her. Women whispered that she had bewitched him with desperation. Each word fed the ghost inside her chest, whispering that she did not belong. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the snow, Evelina lingered near the edge of the cabin clearing, listening to the wind. In the distance, faint voices carried. Harsh, sharp, too many together. She crept closer, careful not to crunch the snow beneath her boots, until the words came clear. "Can't let it stand," Silas Boone was saying. "She's nothing but shame. Him keeping her here only feeds the wrong ideas. We'll drive her out before spring, mark me." A chorus of agreement followed. Evelina's stomach turned, her breath clouding before her in quick bursts. She clutched her cloak tighter, retreating silently back to the cabin. Inside, Tahu was tending the fire. He looked up as she entered, her face pale, her hands shaking. She did not need to speak. He read the truth in her eyes. Slowly, he straightened, setting the poker aside. "They plan to drive me away," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They will not rest until I am gone." He crossed to her, laying a hand over hers, steady and firm. His gaze held hers with an intensity that cut through her fear. "They cannot take what God has given," he said. The words landed in her chest like stones sinking into still water, rippling outward until they filled every corner of her. She closed her eyes, clutching his hand as though it were the only solid thing left in the world. The storm was gathering, but here in this moment, she was not alone. The blizzard came like a living thing, swallowing the valley in a white roar that pressed against the cabin walls. The days shrank to little more than pale smudges between nights, and Evelina learned to mark time by the sound of the fire cracking and the breath of wind slamming against the shutters. Each morning she rose before the others, feeding the hearth with wood, her hands raw but steady. She had lived many winters before, but never like this, never with the weight of being needed, never with the quiet strength of being watched and not dismissed. Tahu moved through the storm with a determination that unnerved her. He went out daily to cut wood, his bare chest steaming against the icy air, a figure of endurance etched against the blinding snow. Evelina begged him once to cover himself better, but he only shook his head with a half-smile, as though the cold were an old companion. Yet on the third day, when he returned with the axe heavy in one hand and his other arm pressed against his side, she saw the truth. His skin bore a gash where the blade had glanced, shallow yet bleeding, his breath harder than usual. Without hesitation she pulled him to the firelight, her fingers trembling as she drew away the fur cloak. The wound traced his ribs, red against bronze. She tore cloth from one of her own dresses, pressing it against him, her palms slick with warmth not her own. His gaze did not waver, fixed upon her face, his jaw tight but silent. She felt the heat of his skin through the fabric, the powerful rise and fall of his chest. It was not the wound that shook her most, but the intimacy of being so close, of having his strength yield into her care. "You should rest," she whispered, binding the cloth tighter. His lips curved faintly. "I rest now." Something fragile stirred in her at those words, a thread of belonging she had not dared to weave. She tied the bandage, her hands lingering longer than they should, then drew back quickly, her face burning in the firelight. He did not move, but the quiet between them was thick, humming with something unspoken. Redbird crept to Evelina's side, slipping her small hand into hers. "You take care of him like a wife," the girl said in a whisper meant only for her. Evelina's throat closed, her heart leaping and breaking all at once. She pressed the child's hand gently, but offered no reply. The storm did not relent. Food became harder to stretch, and Evelina learned to make broth from scraps, to mend clothing with what thread she could salvage, to hold Redbird close when the nights grew so cold that even the fire seemed to falter. Tahu worked still, though slower, his strength tempered by the wound. Evelina's shame began to shift, day by day, into something steadier. She was not a cast-off here. She was the firekeeper, the healer, the storyteller. She mattered. Yet the shadows of town lingered. When Evelina ventured back for supplies, she felt the eyes upon her sharpened by winter's hunger. Words drifted through alleys, venomous. "She's bewitched him." She'll drain him dry. Too old to give him what he needs. Evelina carried them home like stones in her pockets, each one heavy. One evening, she stood at the window, watching snow swirl into drifts. Her reflection stared back at her, silver hair glinting in the lamplight, lines etched by years. For a moment, she almost believed the whispers, that she was only a burden draped in borrowed warmth. Then she heard Redbird's laughter by the fire, saw Tahu's silhouette bent over carving a new figure for the girl, his strong hands patient despite the storm raging outside. The sight cracked something inside her. She was not burden here. She was part of the fabric of the room, woven tight into its rhythm. Still, the storm of men brewed beyond the snow. Evelina sensed it when a rider's shadow passed the cabin one twilight, lingering too long before moving on. She felt it in the sudden silence when she entered town, the way men leaned together with voices too low to catch. They had not forgotten their vow to drive her out. Each day's survival felt like reprieve, not deliverance. The night it came to a head, the wind had calmed, but the sky was heavy with dark clouds. Evelina sat by the fire, Redbird asleep against her lap, when Tahu stiffened suddenly, his head turning toward the door. Outside, the faint glow of torches flickered against the snow, their light weaving between the trees like angry stars. Voices rose, men's voices, many of them, muffled but urgent. Evelina's heart lurched. She pulled Redbird closer, her breath sharp. Tahu rose, his figure filling the cabin, the axe still near the hearth. He met Evelina's eyes, his calm steady even as the shadows drew near. "They come," she whispered, the words thin with fear. He nodded once. "They will not take you." The torches drew closer, their flames licking against the windows. Fists pounded the door, rattling the wood. The shouts cut through the night. "Send her out. We won't have her here. Drive her back where she belongs." Redbird stirred, frightened, clutching Evelina's skirt. Evelina held her tightly, her own fear battling with a strange, sudden resolve. She looked at Tahu, standing tall before the door, his chest bare, scar gleaming in the firelight, and knew this storm was unlike the one of snow and wind. This storm was human, cruel, and it would test not only his strength but her own. She rose slowly, her knees trembling but steadying beneath her. "I will not hide," she said softly, more to herself than to him. For too long she had bowed beneath scorn, let shame carve her hollow. But here in this cabin, with this child at her side and this man before her, she had found something worth defending. The pounding at the door grew louder. Evelina placed Redbird gently on the cot, brushing hair from her brow. Then she turned back to the fire, to the warmth that had become her anchor, and to the man whose silence had sheltered her. The storm was at their door, and she would face it. The door shuddered beneath another blow. Evelina's breath caught, but her spine held straight. She met Tahu's eyes across the fire. The unspoken passed between them. This was the trial that would decide more than survival. It would decide belonging. And with the next strike, the wood began to crack. The door split under the force of fists and boots, snow gusting in through the cracks as the wood groaned against its frame. Evelina pressed a trembling hand to her chest, feeling her own heartbeat like a drum in her ribs. Redbird whimpered from the cot, small fingers clutching at the blanket, her wide eyes reflecting the fire's glow. Evelina wanted to run to her, to shield her, but she could not pull her gaze from the man before the door. Tahu stood tall, shoulders squared, the torchlight from outside flickering against the planes of his chest. He did not move back. He did not yield. He was stone and storm, rooted in a calm more terrible than rage. The wood gave way, splinters flying, and men poured into the cabin, their breath steaming in the cold, their coats thick with frost. Torches lit the space in harsh light, shadows leaping across the walls. Silas Boone stood at their head, his voice rising above the clamor. "We warned you, Red Elk. This woman does not belong. She shames this land, and you shame yourself for keeping her." His words lashed like a whip, each one digging into the tender flesh Evelina had tried to shield. She felt the weight of every gaze, men she did not know yet who judged her as though they'd lived her life. A tremor passed through her, shame clawing upward, urging her to shrink, to disappear, to give them what they demanded. For a breath she nearly yielded. But Redbird's voice broke the silence, small and desperate. "Don't take her, Mama." Evelina turned, the words striking her like lightning. "Mama." The child clung to her blanket, tears brimming. No scorn in those eyes, no measure of years or worth, only need, only love. Evelina's knees weakened, but not from fear. From resolve. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate, her cloak brushing the floor as she stepped into the firelight. The men turned to her, expecting tears, begging, perhaps silence. Instead, her voice carried steady though quiet, stronger for its restraint. "You call me too old, too barren, too broken. But it is not age that poisons, it is cruelty. I came here seeking dignity, and you tried to strip it from me with laughter and whispers. Yet here I stand, not by your permission, but because I live, and because God Himself has seen fit to place me here." A hush fell. Even the fire seemed to still. Evelina's silver hair shone in the torchlight like a crown, her back straight despite the tremor in her hands. For the first time since her arrival, she felt no need to bow beneath the weight of scorn. She looked into their faces and saw not truth, only fear dressed as mockery. Silas sneered, his lip curling. "Fine words for a cast-off. But words won't change what you are." Tahu stepped forward then, his voice rolling deep as thunder. "She is not cast off. She is chosen. She is mine." He spread his arms, bare and scarred, his body a shield between her and the mob. His eyes burned with a certainty that froze the men where they stood. "God finally sent her to us. You will not take what was sent." The weight of his declaration filled the cabin, pressing against the men's bravado. They shifted, their torches wavering. No man dared take the first step against him, against that calm fury that promised ruin. Evelina felt the heat of his words like a hand upon her heart. Not rejected. Not waste. Chosen. Redbird scrambled from the cot and ran to Evelina, wrapping thin arms around her skirts. Her small voice rose, breaking whatever spell lingered. "Don't make her leave. She's our family now." The truth of a child carried further than any argument. The men faltered, eyes dropping, mouths pressing shut. One by one, their stares broke away, the weight of shame settling heavier than the winter air. The torches lowered, sputtering against the wind that sneaked through the doorframe. Even Silas, face mottled with anger, could not hold their resolve together. He spat into the snow trampled on the floor and turned, his boots striking hard. "This isn't finished," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. But it was finished. The others followed, their bravado scattered, leaving only the dying glow of torchlight fading into the storm outside. The cabin sagged into silence, broken only by the crackle of fire and Redbird's soft sniffles. Evelina's legs nearly gave way, and she steadied herself against the table, breath ragged. Tahu turned to her then, his chest rising, scar catching the glow. His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her throat tighten. He closed the space between them slowly, his movements deliberate, his silence speaking more than words could bear. He reached for her hand, his palm rough, warm, anchoring. "You are not alone," he said. The words were not promise but truth, solid as the timbers around them. Evelina's eyes blurred with tears, but they did not fall from sorrow. She gripped his hand tightly, the warmth seeping into her bones. For so long she had lived as though her worth had been spent, as though the years had emptied her. Yet here, before the man who had stood like a wall between her and the storm, with the child who called her mother, she felt full, radiant even in her weariness. The snow outside muffled the world, but within the cabin, the air shifted, alive with something she had thought lost forever. Tahu bent his head, not with demand but with reverence, and whispered close enough for her alone. "God finally sent you to us." Her lips parted on a trembling breath, her heart swelling with an ache both fierce and tender. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against his chest, feeling the strong beat beneath her palm. For the first time in decades, she did not feel cast aside. She felt home. The days that followed moved in quiet grace. The storm outside thickened, but inside there was laughter, there was warmth, there was the steady rhythm of a life shared. Evelina rose with the dawn to tend the fire, her hands moving with purpose. Tahu cut wood and healed slowly, his gaze always steady when it found her. Redbird clung to Evelina with unshaken devotion, her joy proof that love did not measure age but presence. When the snow finally broke and the sun returned, pale but certain, they stood together outside the cabin. A circle of sky widened above them, blue against the white world. Tahu took Evelina's hand, lifting it to his lips before the vast silence of the land. No witnesses but the child and the sky, no ceremony but the truth spoken between them. "You are wife," he said, not as question but as vow. Her tears came freely then, streaming down cheeks unashamed. "And you are mine," she whispered, her voice breaking into a smile. They sealed it not with flourish, but with the quiet certainty of souls who had survived storms together. Evelina's hair gleamed silver in the sunlight. Her dignity no longer something she sought in others' eyes, but something she carried within herself. The whispers of town were behind her, their ghosts broken. What remained was life, hard, fragile, yet deeply hers. Perhaps you too have been told your time has passed, that your worth has dimmed with the years. But hear me. Love is not bound by age, nor is dignity lost to time. It waits, patient as snow, until the moment it is claimed. And if you linger with me a little longer, click the story waiting on your screen. One even more tender than this, and you'll find your heart carried further down the trail.